Conscious of time, we're going to try and cram a fair bit into the next 60 minutes. So for those of you that have joined so far, thank you very much for joining us today to run through a session where we look at Malcolm Gladwell and some views on his thought leadership, particularly around the time that we all find ourselves in. I'll let Carmel go into that in a little bit more detail. So I'll get straight into it and run through just a few introductions on who we have speaking today. So Carmel and I have worked together for some time. I am the dedicated AE for PolSource, a platinum partner of Salesforce, and Carmel is one of the dedicated AEs within business services for Salesforce. And we came together to bring this event together to essentially look at speaking with some exec leaders. So we've got Dave Falconer, who's the COO of PolSource, Ed Wall, who's the Senior AVP at Salesforce for Business Services, and Stephen Gee, who's the Managing Director at MeetTheBoss. And these guys run teams across Europe and have had to adapt considerably, as a lot of people have over the last 6 to 8 months. It seems like it's been a lot longer than that, but yeah, 6 to 8 months. And we wanted to bring these guys together to essentially look at how businesses are having to change and adapt in the current climate, and using the video with Malcolm Gladwell to kind of portray that. So I'll pass over to Carmel at this stage.
Great. Well, thank you for joining, everyone. Like Matthew said, we're really excited to bring this insight from Malcolm Gladwell, a fantastic author who hopefully many of you have read some of his books or engaged with him before. So this is really looking at how previous generations have responded to difficult times and how businesses have adapted to look towards how we might take some of those learnings into our own businesses and roles. So we really hope you enjoy it, and we'll get on with the video. Thank you.
Good stuff.
Pleasure to meet all of you out there. I hope you and your families have been safe. As you can see from the length of my hair, it's been quite some time since I've interacted with society. Hope I'm not scaring anyone. So I wanted to talk this morning about what it means to come out of a time like this. Now, obviously, I can't speak to your individual business, but I think I can talk about that in a kind of broader, more conceptual sense. All of you are in the business of reaching out and connecting with people. And that means you have to have some understanding of how people are feeling and thinking, and most important, what they want at this particular moment. So that's the question I want to try and address. What is it that we want post-pandemic? What will we be looking for? What's the kind of psychology that emerges out of this kind of difficulty? And I thought it's obviously a huge question, but the way I wanted to take a stab at it today is to look back at previous moments in our nation's history where we have gone through similar kinds of turmoil and stress, and try and look for lessons in the way we handled those particular incidents. And I thought of this because, for totally random reasons, I was reading a book about bombers in World War II, bomber pilots in World War II. And it was focused on this period when the US Air Force was bombing Germany in 1943 and early 1944. And it's really the darkest period of the war. The pilots are being shot down in huge numbers every time they fly over Germany. In fact, they're required to fly 25 missions before they end their service. And the fatality rate on each mission is 4%. So you can do the math, and they can do the math. I just wanted to read you this little passage from the book I was reading. Most of them, the pilots, were becoming convinced they had no chance of surviving. Although they were fatalistic about it, they were also bitter. Many of them drank too much. Fistfights often broke out at the officers' club. Getting drunk and attacking a superior officer was a popular way to spend an evening. But insubordination was usually overlooked because everyone understood what caused it. And then the book goes on for pages to describe just how miserable their lives were. They were miles from home. They were living in these cold, semi-heated huts. It was raining half the time. They're exhausted. And statistically, they know the chances that they'll survive this particular campaign are zero, right? And remember, these guys are 20 years old. So they were all born in the early 1920s, which meant that almost all of their childhood memories are the Depression. So at some point during their adolescence, chances are that their father lost his job, or their mother was out of work, or their family went hungry, so these are people who their entire adolescence is shaped by suffering and poverty. And then just as they reach the age of 20, they're shipped over to Europe and asked to sacrifice their lives, right? To be in a situation where they know mathematically they will not survive. So they have two very different and very consequential traumas right in a row. And then what happens? Well, we know what happens. They keep fighting and they win the war. And then the war ends, and this group of doubly traumatized people comes back, and they're the greatest generation, right? They somehow undergo a transformation and launch one of the greatest surges in economic growth in the history of the world. So how does that happen? How do they emerge from a pattern of difficulty and flip a switch and make that transformation happen? Now, some of the answer is human resilience. We are, as human beings, just simply a lot better at recovering from hardship than we realize. That's why the human species has survived for as long as we have. But I think there's another really crucial part of this. And that is that there's a real clue in how these twin crises are handled by people in positions of leadership. And I think it's in the way that those crises are handled, that I think we can find some lessons that are pertinent to our situation today. People in positions of leadership in the 1930s and 1940s made a series of really brilliant and insightful decisions about how to frame the challenges facing Americans. And that's the piece of this that I think we can learn from. So what do I mean by framing? Well, let me give you two examples, both one historical and one more recent. And I'll start with the historical example. There was a prize fight, a boxing match in Jersey City in 1921 between George Carpentier, who was a French heavyweight champion, and Jack Dempsey, and who was at the time the greatest boxer in the world. And this was it was the greatest sporting event of 1921. It was like the Super Bowl of 1921. 90,000 people bought tickets for that boxing match. The purse was, I think, 1.7 million, which in 1921 is a staggering amount of money. And reporters come from around the world. I mean, it's a huge deal. At the time, there's a young man working for RCA named David Sarnoff. And RCA at the time is the world's leading manufacturer of radio sets. Now, radio was a brand new technology in the 20s. And the radios work, you can buy them in stores, but RCA has a problem, and that is that consumers are completely uninterested in radio. They think they've invented the future, and nobody's interested. So Sarnoff goes to his bosses and says, look, this boxing match, we should broadcast it live on the radio. What a way to showcase what radio is about. Because at that point, radio was just classical music in the news. So he makes this pitch to his bosses, and they say, that's the dumbest idea we ever heard. And he comes back, he's super persistent. Comes back and says, no, it's a fantastic idea, you gotta let me do it. And finally, he's annoying them so much, they say, you can do it, but you're on your own. He goes out and he finds a kid who will be his play-by-play announcer, because no one's ever done a live broadcast of a sporting event before. So he invents this notion of a sports announcer. And he basically steals a radio transmitter from the Army, which is a whole nother story, which I won't get into. And then he has the sales staff of RCA put radio sets all around the country, bars, union halls, restaurants, so people can hear this thing. And he broadcasts, it's the first sports broadcast in American history. It lasts about 20 minutes. And at the end, Dempsey knocks out Carpentier. And after the broadcast airs, this incredible thing happens, which is that radio takes off. That is the moment that radio goes from this technology that's going nowhere to this technology that is one of the runaway success stories of the 20th century. Now, what is so special about that? Why would a 20-minute broadcast of a boxing match be the tipping point that changes radio from a failure to a runaway success story? And the answer is the way in which that broadcast reframed the way consumers thought about radio. Before that, if you asked an American consumer in 1921 what radio was for, they would have said, well, it's a way of getting the news, right? It's a big box, costs a lot of money. I stick it in my living room and I get the news on it. And the reason people weren't interested in it was that in 1921, people were inundated with news. Every major city in this country had 6, 7, 8 newspapers, morning newspapers, mid-morning newspapers, noon newspapers, afternoon newspapers, evening newspapers. You got kids on every street corner waving newspapers for 10 cents. The last thing you needed was more news. So everyone said, why would I buy this radio set when I can get news anytime I want? Now along comes Sarnoff and says, no. This thing that you have been thinking of this way as being about the news is not that. This box, this big expensive technical box, is actually a way of bringing the world live into your living room. It is a way of attending the most eagerly anticipated sporting match of the year without leaving your easy chair. And the minute that people understand that, it completely changes the meaning of radio, and they line up down the street to buy radio sets. That act reframes people's understanding of radio. He doesn't change radio. He doesn't change the facts about radio. He simply changes the way people make sense of radio. He changes the category they put it in. That's reframing. And when you talk to people who study social change, they will tell you, you cannot get any kind of transformation in people's attitudes or behaviors or line of thinking without a reframing. That people change their mind, particularly in times of crisis, not because they come to a new understanding of the facts, but because they have a new way of making sense of the facts they already know and understand. Let me give you another example of reframing, something that's a little more current. If you talk to social change theorists, they'll tell you that one of the most extraordinary social transformations of the last generation was what happens with seatbelts in the 1980s. We forget this now, but up through the mid-1980s, there was a public health crisis in this country, and that is that nobody wore seatbelts. It wasn't because we didn't know how effective they were. We did know. People just wouldn't put them on. I remember my dad driving around in the late 70s and never occurred to him to wear a seatbelt. And I'm sure your parents were the same way. And people, public safety advocates went to enormous lengths to try and convince Americans to buckle up, and everything failed. Laws were passed, public service announcements, automatic bell. I mean, I could go on and on and on with a number of initiatives that were tried over the course of a 20-year period, and nothing worked. Seatbelt use rates through the mid-80s were about 15%. And then at a certain point, seatbelt advocates decided they had to change tactics. And they go out and they say, you know what, we're going to stop telling people what to do. Instead, we're going to go to one state legislature after another, and we're going to change the laws about child restraints. We're going to say, forget the adult, but if a kid's in the car, the kid has to be restrained. So they pass all these laws, and everyone says, oh, that makes sense. My kid is incredibly vulnerable. They're 15 pounds. Of course, I'll buckle my kid up. And all of a sudden, the minute they buckle their kid up, the whole issue is reframed. And they think, wait a minute, if I'm buckling my kid up, why wouldn't I buckle myself up? It's reframed from the government telling them what to do to a question of parental responsibility. I need to keep myself safe. And by the way, the kids then become advocates for seatbelt use, and they start saying, Daddy, why are you, why am I buckled up when you're not, right? Are you somehow less valuable than I am? And overnight, you see seatbelt rates go from 15 to 70%. It's an extraordinary act of transformation. Same thing, right? Think about those two cases. We have crises, and one case, it's people dying on the roads. It's another case, it's an industry that can't sell its product. And in both cases, you have a public that is resistant, that doesn't want to listen. And how do the salespeople for those ideas win? They win by changing the frame of the conversation, by understanding where people are psychologically, what their needs and wants are in that moment, and changing the conversation to address those particular psychological needs. So let's go back to soldiers and pilots. So what was it that allowed those pilots who grew up in the Depression under extraordinary economic deprivation and then went through a living hell during the Second World War, what allowed them to come home and somehow transform themselves into the greatest generation and the engine of an extraordinary period of entrepreneurship and growth? Well, I think it's because, in part, there is this extraordinary multiple acts of reframing over the course of the 30s and 40s. So you start with the Depression. Does FDR in the White House and the New Deal change the facts of the Depression? Actually, they don't. If you look closely, you'll see that unemployment rate peaks in 1934 at 22%. And by the time the war breaks out and America goes to war in 1941, it's still at 15%. They didn't make a lot of progress against the Depression during the 1930s. The hard times didn't change, but what changes was the frame that Social Security is signed into law in 1935, and it fundamentally changes the frame of the way people see their connection to each other and to the government. By the way, I should point out that Social Security in the beginning is not a terribly generous plan. Half of Americans aren't covered by it. You know, part-time workers, agricultural workers, teachers, government workers, nurses, they're all exempted. The point of Social Security is not that it's this massively generous program, it's that it changes the conversation. It's the government stepping forward for the first time and saying, we have your back. We are your social safety net. We are now going to take responsibility for your well-being. At no time in American history did the government ever say that as explicitly as they did in 1935. And that makes a world of difference to Americans because it addresses their core psychological anxiety in that moment. Then comes the war, right? And we're asking the same traumatized population now to go overseas and risk their life, right? And how do we do it? With another reframe. And what is the reframe of the Second World War? It is collective sacrifice. It is the notion that we are all in this together, every single one of us. And the reason those pilots are willing to risk their lives and put up with that much deprivation over in England in 1943 is they know that everyone else is putting their life on the line, right? They understand that they're not alone. The way the issue has been reframed is so powerful that it permits them to engage in extraordinary acts of bravery. And what happens at the end of the war? Not business as usual. We don't go back to the way things were before the Depression or back to the way things were before the Second World War. No, we get a new frame, which is the GI Bill. And the GI Bill passes in 1944. And I think most people would say it's the most important, one of the 5 most important bills ever passed in Congress. And it says that every single veteran, if they served 90 days or more in the service during the Second World War, is eligible for low-cost mortgages, low-cost loans to start a business, 1 year of unemployment compensation, and dedicated payments of tuition to the community college or the college of their choice. That is a reframe, a massive reframe. And it's a reframe about opportunity, right? It is a symbolic gesture that says to everyone who is serving in the war, when you come home, we are going to help you start a whole new life and take a big step forward in your ability to pursue the American dream. And in other words, the reason the United States was able to get through those periods of 2 incredibly difficult and traumatic stresses in the course of 15 years is that at every stage, the leadership of the country reads the psychology of the population and addresses it, gives them something, not necessarily something that solves their problems, but simply a concept, a way of thinking about their problems that addresses their fundamental concerns in that moment. Now, so security, sacrifice, opportunity, right? 3 brilliant frames in quick succession. Now, that's a lot of history, but I think it's super relevant because since March, we have been going through a version of that, right? We've had a mini war and a mini depression all at once. That's what the last 6 months have been. A war against a virus and an economic shutdown that has cost us trillions of dollars in lost growth. And what's the distinguishing fact about this crisis, these two twin crises? I think it's uncertainty. If you look back at World War II, we had absolute certainty about the fight we were engaged in. We knew who our enemy was. We knew what our enemy wanted. And that made coordinating our own efforts relatively straightforward. In this case, we don't have that certainty. We know we're fighting a virus, but we don't really understand the virus. We don't know how to treat it properly. We don't have a vaccine. We think we may get a vaccine, but we don't know when we're going to get a vaccine. We can't even agree on how to fight the infection. In the meantime, we've got an ongoing debate in this country about whether we should be wearing masks or not. Any of you who are parents know that your school cannot tell you now whether they're going to come back in September, your kid's school. That's a lot of uncertainty, right? In the Second World War, we also had political certainty. You had leadership in this country that was firmly committed to a very specific strategy of fighting the war. We forget this now, but when Truman took over as president in 1945, he had an 87% approval rating from the American public. That's certainty. We all knew who our leader was, and we all were behind that leader 100% or 87%, right? I don't want to wade into politics here, but we don't have that today, right? We're divided. Not only are we divided about whether we like the occupants of the White House, but the White House is divided with other parts of the federal government. There's an ongoing war between the NIH and the FDA and the CDC and the White House. And then when you look around the country, you see a patchwork of different approaches. Some states taking a very hard line. You go to Georgia and you've got the governor who's taken the opposite approach. I could go on. This is the opposite of certainty. This is 100 different voices, all saying something different at a time when, in other instances, we've had that kind of certainty. And thirdly, we no longer have certainty about the shape of economic growth. We had that after the war. There was a very clear sense that a rising tide was going to lift all boats in 1946 and 47 in the United States. And the same thing with the period of growth we just went through before all this hit. I live up in upstate New York near the town of Hudson. And over the last 5 years, Hudson was transformed. And the thing about that economic growth is that all of us were absolutely certain that it benefited all of us, right? That was the thing about it. It benefited low-wage workers and high-wage workers. It benefited real estate. It benefited the antique stores, the restaurants, the local government filled up its coffers. I could go on and on and on. Now what happens? Now when you look at what's going on in places like this little town of Hudson or in your community, we don't have that same certainty that economic growth is going to benefit us all. It's a patchwork. Some people are thriving and some people are not. Nationally, you've got the airlines that, I wouldn't like to be in their shoes. They're really, really struggling. At the same time, you've got Tesla's stock's never been higher, and many of the tech companies are doing really well. This is a patchwork system. And in the middle, you've got a group of people who don't know whether they're winners or losers, right? Who are sitting instead in a state of anxiety about when is this thing going to end and how is it going to impact my business in the medium term, right? I'm sure all of you fall into one of those camps, right? But the bottom line is that when you talk to your coworkers or talk to your customers or talk to your family, you will hear this same theme of uncertainty over and over again. So what does that mean for people who have to go out in the world and communicate with clients and customers in many different fields? The first thing is that the obvious point from all of this discussion is you cannot go back to business as usual. The same frames that were working in January do not work now because it's not January anymore, right? Look at that example I gave you of the Second World War. The crucial thing about that example is how specific those frames were to the moment. If you talked opportunity in America in 1935, you would have been laughed out of town. There was no opportunity, right? It would be foolish. You would seem like you were blowing smoke, right? Similarly, if you talked security in 1943 would have made no sense. America couldn't sit and hunker down and pretend to be all by itself. It had to go out there and to wage war if the world was going to return to normal. And lastly, if you talk sacrifice in 1946 and 47, that would have been a disaster. That is not what the American people wanted. They were exhausted by the war and they were worn out by the Depression. And what they wanted was a shot, an image of a glimmering future. They wanted a path out of the situation that they were in. These kinds of frames are specific to the moment. And I think that at this moment, the frame that matters the most is addressing this fundamental uncertainty. We need to find a way to structure our conversations with the people that we're interacting with around themes of partnership, of loyalty, of support, of clarity. All those themes that resonate, I think, with the dominant anxiety of the moment. Just before this COVID thing started, I went to Jacksonville, Florida, to do some reporting on an episode of my podcast, Revisionist History, you should all listen to. And I was hanging out with a nonprofit that works with the homeless. And this is purest coincidence. I was really interested in this scatter plot that they had using Salesforce.com Tableau software. They had created a visualization of every homeless person in the city of Jacksonville on a graph, and where the x-axis was their vulnerability and the y-axis was how long they've been on the streets. And it was a way for them to focus their resources on the people who needed help the most. It's an incredibly fascinating thing that has transformed the way people in that world think about solving the problem they're having. Now, that was before COVID. Think about the way that organization is thinking now after 6 months of this. First of all, we know that homelessness is directly correlated with unemployment rates. So the number of homeless in Jacksonville over the next year is going to rise by, pick a number, at the very least 10 or 15%, at the high end, maybe as much as 25 or 30%. So they are facing a radically new challenge in the months ahead, radically different scope of responsibility, or to put it another way, a radically different opportunity, right? The shape of their work has changed in the last 6 months. And I don't think they're the only ones. I suspect that for many of you, there is the same mixture of different responsibilities, different opportunities, and different challenges created by this pandemic. But think about the other side of the equation. A group like that funds the work it does through a mixture of private donations, local government support, and federal government support. Well, who knows what's going to happen to personal philanthropy over the next year and a half. I mean, a lot of people have been hit hard. Will they have room left in their budget to be giving to things like homeless nonprofits? We know what's going to happen to local funding. Local governments in Jacksonville and across this country are out of money. I think it's reasonable to assume that they're not going to get more, they're going to get less to meet this challenge. And then federal government. I mean, what are the odds that helping the homeless is going to be high on the congressional and White House agenda in the next 6 months? I think probably slim, right? This is an organization that is facing radical uncertainty about how they're going to do their job. Now, it's really important to understand that they don't need new tools. They have brilliant tools. They've got Tableau software, which has transformed the way they understand and attack their problem. They don't need new people. They have a great dedicated staff of people working. They don't need new strategies. Over the last 5 years, the ways in which homeless organizations around the country have attacked the problem of homelessness have been transformed. They are way ahead of the game when it comes to devising the right approach to solving this problem. What they need is certainty. What they need are partners and allies and collaborations that say to them, I'm with you. I'm not going anywhere. I'm willing to be patient and to support you and see you through this extraordinarily unsettling and anxious time. They need people who take a page from the 1930s and the 1940s and who understand the psychology of the moment and reframe their messages accordingly. And I think the people who can meet this challenge, who can understand how to successfully reframe that message to meet the mood and psychology of the moment are the ones who are going to thrive in the coming months and years. Thank you.
Great. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that. I'm sure some of you picked up that this was recorded a couple of months ago, so pre-election or potential announcement of a vaccine, but still some really interesting perspectives from Malcolm. I especially like the radio story, and I think it's also a good reminder, particularly today on Remembrance, of how much difficulty a lot of our ancestors and a lot of businesses have gone through in the past, and a bit of inspiration that we can also get through them. So in line with the advice Malcolm suggested for reframing businesses in these difficult times, we wanted to put out some questions to our panelists. So I'm going to start maybe with a question to you, Ed. And the question's really going to focus on Malcolm's suggestion of how you're understanding what your customers are thinking, feeling and wanting in order to provide them with the best services or the best solutions for their business.
Yeah, so just I think he touched on a couple of themes, which again, when I rewind back to March, April, I think as a business, like every other business, we were a bit thrown. Again, how do we cope with this? Nobody had seen this coming. And then one of the things, I think one of the first steps that we took as a company internally was to provide some kind of certainty in terms of one for our own employees and staff, and our CEO came out quite early in saying we're not going to have any layoffs over the next 90, 120 days. So I want to give them certainty, because for me, that's where it starts, because that transmits out to the customer then as well. I think the other thing that we did then as well, once we adapted, was just to reframe how we looked at things then as well. And we adapted to this new Zoom and digital world, is that we launched an initiative in terms of having 1 million conversations with our customers across our Q2. And that was a global initiative where we actually just wanted to reach out and talk to all of our customers. That's expressly what that initiative was about, to actually gather their feedback in terms of what they were feeling, how their businesses were responding, and also then how we could help as well. And we had some initiatives around our work.com, again, which will allow them to do that. And then I think the third thing that we did is we pivoted to become more like a startup as well, so that we could give that feedback back to our CEO, where we are continuing now running a global all hands every week, which is hosted and chaired by our CEO. So he can share with us and we can share with him what's actually going on with the company. So we're getting 50,000 people all aligned around during this Q2 and Q3, those 1 million conversations, which again will feed back again into those kind of global all hands then as well. So I think, the themes that are coming back out to us again from how we engage, you see it now in terms of our Dreamforce to you. We're trying to give everybody a specific and unique experience around our Dreamforce. Is that we've had to adapt to this new way of working, but there is an opportunity once you reframe it that way, and it's important that you carry in that mindset then as well. So I think they're kind of some of the key things that I would see in relation to what Malcolm has just talked about there.
Fantastic. Stephen or Dave, do you have any follow-ups to that question?
Yeah, I think, when understanding what our customers think and feel, our focus really is not on technology and the business, not just on technology and the business process, but also understanding the trends in the industry. And I think that's ever more pertinent now, because different industries have had hugely different impacts, as Malcolm was saying. We try to start with a business conversation to make sure that the technology that we're delivering is going to be absolutely relevant and make a difference. And we've introduced what we call our 10 keys framework, which understands really what success for our customers it looks like, and really what is going to be their vision for their investment. And this really helps us to take joint decisions on what's the best service or solution that hopefully will meet that vision and metrics. And all of our engagements, we really put a lot of emphasis on building trust, because at this point in time, trust, of course, is one of the principal core values in our business, and trust is so implicit, really, to being successful with our clients. And we've kind of flipped our methodologies to focus, right, not only on how our team delivers and expecting our customers to follow us, but actually on the customer journey and their expectations through each activity and phase of a program. So we really feel that we've moved the needle, really, when it comes to that deep understanding of the drivers of today.
Great, and I agree. I think trust is definitely intrinsic. But Stephen, do you have...
I think it's interesting that you both mentioned about trust or this partnership piece. I think if anything has been true of the period we've just been and are going through, it's that commitment to that partnership that's key. Because and I think one of the things that's been interesting, it's also allowed us this period to probably ask the why question a lot more than perhaps we had done historically, and really understanding why our partners were doing or wanting to do what they were doing, to critique that and change that, and then in turn be able to reframe and think about how we can perhaps deliver things differently, and realize perhaps that value in a different way, which has been interesting, because that's an opportunity to change that conversation as well, which is for us been positive.
Fantastic. I think Matt has your next question.
Yeah, well, absolutely, Stephen. I think that links very nicely to the next question, where we kind of move from looking at how you're understanding the customer to kind of meet the boss as a business, and how you guys reframe the business and the messaging to suit the new demand that you found. So it's been really interesting to find out how you guys adapted.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know us, we're an events business, I suppose is how you would probably call us in the traditional world. And of course, COVID for our industry as a whole was pretty much like the largest pause button you could ever hit. And when COVID hit in March, about 80% of our revenues were from physical face-to-face events, which for us and for most events businesses could be fundamentally catastrophic. And we had quite a clear conversation at that point to do one or two things. You can either decide at that point to kind of shut up shop and hit the pause button, like a lot of organizations have done out there, and you furlough your staff and you kind of try and weather the storm. We actually chose the alternative path, because I think we knew, because fortunately 20% of our organization was already digital in how we were connecting and delivering our events and connecting people to have conversations of value. We knew that if anything, the commitment from our customers to drive conversations, to interact with peers, to drive business and to generate business. And I think, as Ed just highlighted, they wanted 1 million conversations. Every organization needs those conversations in order to succeed. And so for us, we doubled down on digital. We absolutely reframed our entire business. We pivoted almost overnight from a physical events business to a digital events business, and that was really interesting, because I think when Malcolm talks about the pilots in the war, but one thing we talked about in March was the classic Churchill quote around never wasting a good crisis. And I think for us, actually, it gave us an opportunity to completely reframe our business and reframe the way in which we deliver value for our customers. But fundamentally, what we do didn't change. We were still connecting executives to have conversations of quality. We're bringing groups together to solve challenges, for peers to meet. It's just the vehicle in which we're delivering that's changed. So we've actually seen a 204% growth in our business through COVID, which is incredible. And I'm not saying that necessarily to brag or boast, but actually I think, and I believe that as an event sector, we're an important part of the industry, and actually we need a thriving industry. And so I hope that others are able to see what we've achieved and be able to follow that and use that as an example, because not only our events business needs to succeed, but others do too, to support all the organizations to achieve their goals of generating business and generating conversations, which are never more critical with their customers.
That's fantastic, Stephen. Thanks for that insight. It's obviously very impressive, to say the least, to kind of switch direction almost as a company and adapt to the level that you did, and to see the benefit come out of it. And obviously moving forwards post-COVID, I'm sure this change has kind of changed how you move forward with business as well. I'm sure you won't go back completely to how it was previously.
No, I think we're stuck, or as Malcolm said as well, the things that were pre-January won't be post-COVID, and I think that's true in lots of sectors. We've seen, most of the patterns that have been accelerated through COVID already existed. We've just accelerated them through the transformation that COVID has faced for us. The decline of high street retail, the rise of the digital world even more. It's just accelerating that. So for us, yes, we're excited to get back and physically see people again and bring those things together. But I think that blend of digital and physical will be far greater than it's ever been.
Brilliant. And then same question, I suppose, to Dave and Ed. I don't know if you've got anything.
Yeah. So I'm, for us, our business is all about digital transformation. That's what we do. We're exclusively Salesforce, so we partner with Salesforce to help our mutual customers be succeed in the digital world. And I'm actually reminded, just listening to the conversation, of a quote, and I can't remember who it was, but it was coming out of COVID, coming out of the pandemic. The answer is digital transformation. Now, what was the question? It really is the avenue and the route that everyone needs to take. But what we do find, obviously, depending on which industry we're in, the market is really volatile as people try to come to terms with it. Sometimes requirements are extremely fast, and at other times they're extremely slow, and they even die out as investment opportunities perhaps peter out, or different ebbs and flows in people's businesses. But really identifying fast benefit, I think, and not letting great get in the way of good, and achieving a real rapid ROI is where we feel is moving the needle and making the difference. And so we've developed some quick start packages and accelerators, rapid consulting that hopefully meets our clients' requirements with a real faster ROI. And one of the benefits of us in our organization, we class ourselves as a global boutique, and we're on the smaller side of the Salesforce partner ecosystem, but we have a global coverage, and as a result, we are a completely remote. We have been, and we still are, a completely remote organization ourselves. So we understand really what it takes to support our customers really through this new remote way of working, and we've really been able to help many of our customers adapt, which has really helped us there. And we've focused on providing solutions and accelerators on the Salesforce platform that can really help our customers transform as they adapt to a new way of working that fits their business. Be that remote working themselves, self-service solutions for their customers, or dealing with an increase in call volume at call centers and making the most of each interaction. Call center service centers has really become one of the new real strong channels for sales. So maximizing those opportunities is really fantastic. So reframing our messaging and our delivery really into digestible and measurable chunks really, we feel, has resonated in the market for us.
Right.
Yeah, so just to touch on a couple of the themes that both David and Stephen have touched on. I think two of the key things, I think they both referenced. Again, COVID has achieved, and again, I've been talking about digital transformation for the last 15 years with Salesforce. COVID has achieved more in about 1 month than we as a company achieved in 15 years in terms of accelerating the momentum around that. Particularly, I think when I look at customers in what you would classify as traditional industries, again, where they're either selling people, place, or time, or particularly then where they're selling some kind of expertise. Because a lot of those industries traditionally were face-to-face. That's how they operated, and they have been forced to pivot into a digital world. And actually what they're finding is, if they were ready for that and they'd already started that journey, that they're still able to do the same level of the business, and actually to do it nearly more efficiently through this. Through that, if they have the right technologies in place. I think the other thing that you see, the horse is gone now as well. There is no going back. I think we will have a blended approach in future. Offices will return. All that kind of stuff is overstated about people not wanting to go back. People will still want offices. They will still want a dedicated workspace. But I think it'll be very difficult for any business now to say that we can't let you work from home at some point during the week. It's just not going to be possible to have that conversation. But I think the key themes, again, I was on a conversation with someone called Tiffany Bova. She's a Wall Street, she writes in the Wall Street Journal, and she was talking about the two key themes that she sees are for CEOs right now. One, employee engagement, that you have to have the right tools across your organization. Two, that allow you to do your customer engagement the right way. You need a layer of technology to allow you to do that, particularly working remotely. And fantastic to hear Stephen's story again about a company that's adapted, reframed, and 204% growth is actually absolutely incredible. So congratulations on that, Stephen. That's fantastic.
There's a few more grey hairs, Ed, obviously, but yeah, I'd echo your point there with those key areas. I think across all of the partners that we're working with, every single one of them is approaching us saying, and these are historically conversations where we've been helping them speak just to their customers, which of course is very important, but they're coming to us saying, actually, help us speak to our customers, but also help us speak to our staff. How does that internal messaging, how do we drive that? And how do we do it in a really engaging way? Because the one thing that's absolutely sure is webinar fatigue is definitely something that's starting to hit people. So being exciting and content being really strong is important.
Yeah, couldn't agree.
Great. Well, to move from there, and like you said, Ed, about providing that layer between your customers, and also I think referring back to Mark Benioff's commitment to not make anyone redundant in that initial stage. I suppose it's interesting to see Malcolm spoke about leadership being successful when they provide certainty. So, and Dave, this might be one for you maybe start on, but how are you providing your team and or customers with that certainty?
Yeah, I think that's a really important one. It actually touches on just where Ed and Stephen were going at the end of that last discussion about but employee well-being. It's been our driving force throughout this pandemic. Communication absolutely key, so that the team really knows what leadership are doing and feel a degree of comfort and security. So participation in all of the related activities and buy-in where possible on financial and cost reduction measures really has been core to maintaining the affinity and trust. And measuring and providing a platform for employee engagements across the organization and sharing and working together to improve these engagements based on the results and identifying areas for improvement has all been a very important part of our process. And then trying to make the uncertain certain if possible by planning for uncertainty, leveraging data and market insights to help predict our future company direction. And then being transparent with the team on how we're heading down, how we're heading and the key actions we really need to take to get there. So that's from a team perspective. But then when we turn to our customers, we're trying to offer far more than just delivery excellence. We have a customer success framework that ensures that we invest sufficient time to really understand, as I mentioned before, the industries in which we serve, and so that we get to the specific requirements of our customers' business. And this means that we're able to tailor the approach of any solution to deliver the value that the customer is really seeking. And leveraging our industry expertise, we're able to provide real credible examples actually of solutions, how they operate in practice. And this builds the confidence and the trust and helps the customer plan for success. So there's certainty there. We've developed some agile consulting frameworks that really help customers have real clarity of vision, understand the experiences they need to deliver for their own customers and employees, and then prioritizing these into a real practical roadmap to achieve the right business outcomes. But as I mentioned before, in digestible chunks, that are giving a quick, fast ROI. But then also getting the metrics right here, identifying the sources of business value really early, establishing real objective metrics for both us and our customer to track progress and course correct, which is important, course correct where necessary, because things are very dynamic and changing. So this isn't just about our implementation, but for the customer's adoption and the evolution of their systems and processes. These metrics provide early warning mechanisms that really help us guide ourselves and our customers through troubled waters. Honesty and transparency for me as well in the pre-sales right through delivery, looking at the accuracy and estimates of timelines and financials, and holding ourselves accountable through the implementation, to deliver as we've specified, and providing our customers real-time access to where we are in progress, and also planning for that success. And whilst our customers crave that certainty, right, often our success comes from helping them be very able to capitalize on that uncertainty. Those I mentioned planning for uncertainty, but those that are really being successful, the ones that are able to pivot and adapt. So the solutions and the services we're providing are really designed now to help our customers have the right technology platform to be adaptable and to continually reinvent themselves. So we feel that this approach really has provided some credible comfort and helps to engender that certainty that our clients are looking for, and that our employees are looking for also.
Great, thank you. That's I completely agree with those points. Stephen or Ed, would you like to pick up on any of those?
Yeah, I think Malcolm talks about giving certainty. I've kind of always felt that that's not, I can't give certainty. What I can do is create a framework with which certainty is felt or built. And I think for us in March, when we headed into COVID, I think I was very keen for us to set a tone of over communication right from the start, because fortunately for us, our industry, there was a certain element of fear that sat in the marketplace, and that when you then communicate the positive work that you're doing, and you're giving the support and the guidance around the steps that we're taking and the circle of influence, I suppose, that we want to control. We can't control COVID, we can't control the impacts of that. But actually what we can control is our own transformation and our work and our commitment to our customers. And so I was really clear to kind of think about, okay, well, let's re-communicate all of our values, what we stand for as a business. I think that was really important for us, about building that certainty. And then secondly, to continue to over communicate. So again, Ed, you mentioned your weekly all hands globally. Absolutely, first, exactly the same thing. We have that, we still do that. And actually, I think we'll do it forevermore, because actually that level of communication now has proved really, really helpful in giving certainty and giving direction to our staff. But I think certainty is then with your customers. I think, Dave, there's an interesting point you mentioned there, is also about owning your deliverables, I think, which is something you've really talked really clearly about, and for us is also very important. We own our partnerships and we own our deliverables with our customers, and that certainty right now is really important. So I think they're the two things, both looking internally and externally for us, that we've really tried to think about.
Yeah, I think what's coming across there, just in terms of what I hear, is one of the things that I think is really important is authenticity as well around that level of communication, even with employees and with customers. And I think that really transmits itself, even if things aren't going well, or you're trying to figure out what the answer is. But authentic communication from the top is also brave and transparent. And I think that wins trust. And then you have to be clear around the other thing that Stephen's just mentioned then as well is values. Values are really, really important as well. And I think for anybody setting up a business, it's probably something that you tend not to think about bottom line, profit, customers. But actually, values are really, really important as well in terms of getting you through this type of situation then as well. And they can be kind of your guiding path. So that's kind of like how our executive suite back in San Francisco would certainly try to have to operate, but it's very similar. I think it's just on a larger scale to what Stephen has outlined. It's no different. It is no different.
No, absolutely. And Ed, thanks for that. I think the authenticity piece is I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think that's key in any communication, whether it's with employees or customers, particularly in the time we find ourselves in. So yeah, guys, panelists, thank you very much for the insight into the stuff you're doing. I think it's always valuable to bring a video like what we got from Malcolm to life, as it were. So to all of those that have joined the session, thank you very much for joining. This session has been recorded, so we will be sending that out. And we look forward to speaking with you over the course of the next couple of weeks. So thank you very much, guys.